Hi, and welcome to the Becoming Trauma-Informed podcast, where we help you understand how your past painful experiences are affecting your current reality and how you can shift those so you can create your desired future. I'm Dr. Lee, and both myself and our team at the Institute for Trauma and Psychological Safety are excited to support you on your journey. We talk about all the things on this podcast. No topic gets left uncovered. So, extending a content warning to you before we get started. If you notice yourself getting activated while listening, invitation to take care of yourself and to pause, skip ahead a bit, or just check out another episode. Let's dive in. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode. I am delighted to have a very wonderful guest here today. So we're going to have a conversation around two of my favorite topics in relation to leadership. And I think they're two of my favorite topics because they're things that people don't traditionally connect to leadership. So without further ado, Dana, welcome.
Thank you.
And you know what? I'm going to just be vulnerable here. I completely forgot to ask how you say your last name before we started. So is it Shamas?
Shamas.
Shamas. Okay, great. Dana Shamas. And Dana, I always ask our guests to really tell us who they are themselves because it's so much juicier than if I read it off of my computer screen. So tell us who you are, what you love, and what intuition and joy really have to do with the work you're doing.
Wow. Okay. So that's a lot of topics in one.
You pick and choose whatever parts of that you would like to share.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that. So I am an executive leadership and wellness coach, and I really came to be a coach very organically. It was a very long road, and really what I do now brings together everything I've ever done before this point. And so it's really why I love to do it so much. And it's so much fun and exciting, especially at this particular time. So yeah, because I started off super traditional. I worked in investment banking out of college. I did international development in Serbia and Croatia. I got an MBA in social entrepreneurship. I worked with health and wellness companies. And eventually life brought me to a place where I opened my own business and had a bricks and mortar wellness center where I did therapeutic yoga, breath work, meditation, sound healing, kind of all that esoteric world at a really deep level, actually. And what I found was all my clients were business people. They were all professionals. They were all entrepreneurs. They were doctors. They were lawyers. They were executives. And so what I found is that really I was doing a great deal of coaching in all these other things that I did. And so I pivoted fully to coaching and really focusing on one of the things that everybody reflected back to me, which was that I was very intuitive, right? Mm-hmm. So when people would work with me, I was always able to give them insight and perspective and connect dots on things they just didn't see or didn't perceive or didn't take in. And they're like, wow, you're just so intuitive. And as somebody who came from like investment banking, I was like, really? And so I leaned into that and I just really cultivated my intuition and my intuitive abilities and really began to see how intuitive leaders over my career and in the world that I was were really successful. And like the moments where I saw leaders really excel were the moments that they trusted themselves and they trusted their intuition, right? The people who kind of just followed all the footsteps before them, they kind of just follow along, right? Like they're not those leaders that really create dynamic change, that really lead in a new way. And people who are really joyful and excited, they are just kind of, they're leaders, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But there's this other kind of way of leading, which we're in a place now in the world that we really need. I would say when I went to business school 10, 15 years ago, there wasn't a calling for this kind of leader and the way that there is now, because we know that the systems don't work, right? We know what has gone before us is not solving the problems that are in front of us. And so that means you're going to have to find a different way, right? You're going to have to find a different way forward. You're going to have to find a different way to speak. You're going to have to find a different way to lead, right? And that's all going to come from your intuition, and that's all going to come from your inner knowing and really trusting that. And it's really exciting because people, when you learn to trust yourself and you can lead with your own knowing, it's so powerful, right? It's so powerful for you, and it's so powerful for everybody around you, right? Because it empowers everybody else, right? Like when you lead in that way, everybody else steps up and comes in at a different kind of level. And that's exciting, right? That's what creates shift and change.
Wow. That was phenomenal. I'm like, this is why I have y'all tell us to write so much. But honestly, this is just such a perfect example of, okay, can I trust myself to go with the flow and introduce myself in a way that is right and works in this scenario that I know you've done podcasts before, but like that, I've never been with this host and this time, like ask the question in this way. Can I trust myself to answer it? And I know that might seem like kind of a very small or silly example to some people who are listening. And that really is the crux of it right there. Is in every situation that I get into, as a leader, we're placed into so much uncertainty and there's so much decision making. And I think the thing that trips a lot of leaders up is they are so focused thinking about how they should respond that they don't, and they haven't practiced or like embodied trusting themselves. Whatever comes out of my mouth is going to be the right thing.
It's so true. It's so true. One of my funnest things to do with clients is really support them in before going into a big meeting, getting centered and in a place of really owning and understanding what they're bringing to the table. And what they're bringing to the table isn't like a stack of research or a presentation, right? It's a presence. It's a perspective. It's a voice.
I love that. I feel like that needs to go on like that. Like that's a meme or a quote card. Like it's not about the presentation. It's about your presence. But they so often that's what we do. We think, okay, I'm going into this space. There's all these other really important people or people that like decision makers or, people that rely on me. And there's so much pressure. And it's been really fascinating for me as our company, our organization's grown and as I've been stepping into more leadership places and spaces. If I can trust myself and I can get grounded and like you said, that word centered beforehand, like that's where my energy needs to go.
100%.
Because so often I'll go into a place. This happened the other day. I got hired to do a training workshop, go into the workshop. We got 25% of the slides. I kid you not. Like what I had planned is not what happened. We went with the flow. And at the end, I was like, I just want to say, like, I apologize. We didn't get through this. And everyone was like, are you kidding me? Like, this was exactly what we needed. This was so great. Like, we don't care about the slides. We care about the fact that we were able to have this amazing conversation. And like, I learned so much. And like, that is in direct opposition to so much of what I learned when I was a professor, when I was in leadership positions other places. And I'm just curious too, for you, like in the business world, it's probably very different than how you were conditioned to show up.
100%. And I will tell you that the biggest part of my work is unlearning all that conditioning to value this way of being. because you are taught to look at all the things in the past and do all the research and have all the preparation. And honestly, I find women struggle with this the most because historically, the voice, like you had to have all the facts and then your voice still wasn't heard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm.
It's the proving versus now, if we're now in a space, and it doesn't happen all the time, but it happens way more than it ever has happened in the past, where if you're clear, you're present, and like you provide that channel, things begin to shift and change. And so that presence is really important.
You just clicked something for me in my brain that I'm so grateful for. So I've been reading this book, I Don't Want to Talk About It by Terrence Real, and it's actually about male depression. And in the book, he is talking about how we repress little boys' hearts, and we repress little girls' voices.
Yes.
And what's so fascinating is when we extrapolate that out to being an adult and a leader in a business or a professional setting, think about this. So we are all learning to do business from this very calculated, logical, rational place, the presentation, right?
Heartless. Let's just
Heartless.
say.
Yes, it's heartless. And so for men, that's easier because they've already been taught how to do that. For us as women, right?
Indoctrinated.
Right. So it's still not a good way of doing things. They've just had more practice at it.
Mm-hmm.
So then we're coming into this space and we're like, okay, well, I can't use my heart. And I'm like really good at that. And I also haven't had the practice using my voice. So like I've got two barriers now versus the one. And really, we want to bring both. We want to have our voices and our hearts at the table. And I'm just like, sorry, it's just like this light bulb moment of nobody's really bringing both unless they're doing the work that you are helping them do. And that, is similar to the work that we do is like, who are you and who do you want to be? And like, what does your heart look like? Like, what do you love? What do you care about?
What is your purpose? What is your passion? And how do you bring that forward?
Yeah.
What world do you want to see? How do you think things need to unfold? How do you want this meeting to go in the highest and best good? What is the highest purpose of this project? And how do we go there?
I love that. So one of the things that we've started doing is asking ourselves, like in our business spaces, how do you want to feel at the end of this project? Right. And people will say, it was so interesting. We had somebody yesterday say aligned. And I was like, okay, what does alignment feel like? And I was like, because alignment's not actually a feeling. So we were getting into it and they actually ended up realizing they wanted to feel energized. And for a lot of people, alignment wouldn't equate to energized. And so that's why it's so important to like get to the feeling. And so we started talking about, okay, well, how can you feel energized right now? Like, what are the moves you can make right now that will help you feel energized in the moment, and your future self will feel excited you made them and feel more energized? And like, just watching this person's face, like they totally lit up and they're like, oh, instead of doing this, like I need to be doing this. And they got so excited. And I was like, do you feel like you have more energy? And they're like, yes. And I'm like, okay, go do it. And like, but those two questions of what do you think versus what do you feel? Like those are two different questions.
Mm-hmm. That will lead you into very different places.
Yeah.
And life experiences.
Yeah. What do you think was, or let me ask, this is a two-parter again. I'm really great at the two-parter. What was your biggest struggle really bringing your voice to the table and like leading from this place of intuition and like following the joy? And does that track with what you see in your clients, or is what their biggest struggle something different?
Well, everybody's struggle is different. So there's that,
True.
right?
Yes.
Like we all are individuals, and part of my gift is really honoring you as an individual and supporting you in that process
I
of
love that.
discovering what you need and mastering your own system, right? You're not mastering my system. You're not mastering the way I do things. You're mastering the way you do things, right?
Yes.
And what your heart desires. It's very different.
That's so true. Thank you for that, because we want to look at like, what's the most common thing? And honestly, the most common thing is that everyone has a struggle, right? Like that's the thing that we see is everyone is going to bring some kind of something to the table around this.
Yes, of course.
So
my biggest struggle is letting go of all that training. You know, I spent a lot of time and a lot of money invested in this way of being and doing. And, the truth was like, that isn't it. And it was a struggle from the beginning, right? It wasn't like, I did suddenly realize many years later, I was like, that's why all that didn't work for me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Right. Like that's why all that didn't come together. Okay. But we still live in this world where as much as it's changing, as much as I see the old, starting to crumble, there's still a lot that's really entrenched. And so, it's hard to let go of that programming and being like, nope, this is the way forward. And nope, this is really what's needed. And thank goodness I have so many practices and I have so many personal embodied experience of this knowing and this connection and this guidance that I'm like, right, this is it. This and that it's what people are missing, right? Like my connection to nature, my connection to my knowing allows me to feel more and experience more and have that joy that's just unwavering, and that curiosity that like, no, you don't have to struggle. Things may not be perfect. They may not be exactly what you want, but like the struggle, you don't have to do that, right? You don't have to be unhappy. You can choose it to be different. And there is a way, no matter what your situation is, no matter what your circumstances are, there is a pivot that is more joyful, And so what is that? Like, how do you teach yourself to learn how to pivot towards that versus like, let's just stay in the drudgery of the day to day, that this is the way things are done and what have you.
What do you think, or what do you feel, I'll ask it both ways, is the thing that prepares people to actually make that shift? Because we talk about this a lot in our spaces. There are people that they'll land on our proverbial doorstep and I'm like, dude, like this is it. There's a lot of perceived victimhood, or there's a lot of cognitive dissonance, or like there's a lot, like it's very clear what's going on. And, we gently invite the person to look at those things. And it's fascinating to me how some people are able to see it and others aren't. And so I'm curious in your experience, I have my own thoughts, and I'm curious, like, what do you see as the difference between the people who go, oh, okay, like, let me look at this, let me think about shifting this, and the people who are like, nope, that's not going to work for me?
Oh, that's interesting. That wouldn't have been the two categories that I would have put them in.
Oh, please. What would you put them in? I'm curious. I love how differently actually, I want to share this super quickly. Before, like my biggest thing was being misunderstood and being wrong. And so I'm already just like deeply enjoying this podcast because I'm like, I love that she's like, I wouldn't look at it like that. Cause I'm like, oh, tell me more, instead of being like, oh, I said it wrong, or, oh, I was misunderstood. That's where I'm like, oh, look, healing has been made. Yeah. How would you categorize it? Like, what are the camps of people you see?
Well, I'll start with your camp. I mean, I don't think camps are incorrect. I mean, obviously there are many camps, right?
Yeah.
Um, so what I see as the motivator, I see people in two categories as motivators,
Okay.
right? One is pain, and this is the most common.
Yeah.
So what I find is that people have to be in an immense amount of physical or emotional pain before it moves them to a place of change or curiosity. Like, you have to be at the bottom of the barrel and be like, oh my God, there's got to be a different way because this is so painful. And oftentimes it's like, I just literally can't go on. My body's in so much pain. Whatever it is. I don't wish it were that way, but my experience tells me it's really common. The other one is just curiosity. That people have an innate curiosity, like, oh, it could be better. And those are kind of like the seeker categories. Like, I'm a seeker. I want to know that better. I want to know that more. I want to know that, more juicy, right? I've tasted a little bit and I just have an itch that there's more out there. And the example I always use, like as a yoga student initially, Shavasana would give me this little tiny inkling of more. And when I found breath work gave me like, oh yeah, there's way more. And so, I had those embodied experiences, which is why I'm passionate about sharing them, because then once you have an embodied experience of more, you're like, oh, I think that people who say, oh, nope, that's just not for me, that's a category of people. They're like happy. They're happy enough with their life. Like it's what they wanted. They're content, and that's good. Like if you're good and with your life and you're content and you're like, nope, that's not for me. No, thank you. Great. You go on and do what works for you and like what you're content with. Absolutely nothing wrong with that.
I feel excited hearing your explanation of the two because, of the two kind of coming in and the one is like they're being pulled and the other is like they're being shoved, right? Like life shoved them and they're like, okay, fine. And the other side is like, oh my gosh, I've had this taste of something and I'm intrigued. Like I want more. This is shifting the way I see things. It's shifting the way I experience things. And as someone who's had a good amount of those both sides, both experiences of like, oh my gosh, this is so painful. I never want to do this again. And oh, wow, this is so new and so different. And like, it's not even necessarily that it feels good. Oftentimes it doesn't feel good. Like the first breathwork session I did, I think I sobbed so hard I almost threw up. Like it was not like a fun experience. But when I was done, I was like, oh. It was like, oh, this is how this can feel on the other side. Like if I'm going to feel discomfort or pain either way, like why not choose the pain that takes me somewhere that is more enjoyable to go.
Yeah, that's the truth. And resolving the pain, right? Like it's not just about feeling the pain and being in that place of pain, right? You actually go to a place where you resolve and integrate whatever that is.
Yeah.
And that's like, to me, I was like, oh yeah, okay. That's empowering. Now I have a tool that I can change my breath. I can change my body. I can change my life. I can change the way I create, right? Like that's a whole different kind of thing.
And honestly, I love that you're talking about this. And I love that so many of the people we have on the podcast are in these positions or have had these experiences like in more traditional settings and are bringing them to more traditional settings because it's so important, being in healthcare and in the medical system, there's so much that people would be like, how did your patient get better? Like, how did you do that? And I'm like, I don't know. I just followed my gut. And they're like, but what article or like what protocol? And I'm like, number one, I sat down and I listened, presence. I sat down in the patient's room. I asked them extra questions. I went deeper than like we normally go. And that alone, I think just shifts so much. And I think most leaders don't know how to be present.
Correct. Because, I mean, in the example you just used, doctors, right? In the system that we're currently in, books and books and article of how you're supposed to do things, legal regulations, how you're supposed to do things, proof of how you do things, right? Like there's all this other background noise, right? That they're trying to fit whatever's in front of them into those things, into the appropriate boxes. It's really hard to be present.
Yeah.
And, the only way you can learn to be present with others is to learn to be present with yourself.
Ooh, and how hard is that? I know I spent the better part of 30 years trying to not be in my body, not be present with myself. So relearning how to do that, it was painful.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And the level of self-forgiveness for spending those 30 years not in your body, also very challenging.
Yeah. We tiptoed into breath work, which I would love to chat about a little bit more, because this is, I think a lot of people hear it and their brain goes to like potentially like a kinky place and potentially like a very woo or spiritual place. And then other people, I know a lot of people have a good amount of trauma around their breathing, because I've worked with a lot of neurodivergent autistic humans who, when they got overwhelmed or they got overstimulated, dysregulated, instead of anyone saying like, what's going on? It was take a breath, calm down. And so anytime they hear take a breath, like that actually amps them up.
Right.
So I'm curious, how did you get into breath work and how do you use it with your clients now?
I use it with all my clients because what I got into it I was managing a yoga studio and somebody came in to do a workshop, and it was, as you described your first breath session, that was my first breath session, right? Where just so much emotion, so much sensation that afterwards I was like, oh, this is different, right? And so I just dove down into that path. And so I love giving people those deep experiences with breath work where it's a cathartic practice that moves you into an altered state of consciousness. So you're out of your thinking mind and you're really in your energetic body so that you have different perspective, deeper connection to source, deeper connection to self in a way that's hard for people to find in their walking life, right? Mm-hmm. It's why people do plant medicines or other avenues to find that connection. Yeah. You can do it with your breath. So to me, that's super empowering. And what I found as I went into all kinds of energetic practices is that breath is the fundamental thing that moves and processes energy in your system. Mm-hmm. So if you are not breathing, it does not matter what you are doing. You are suppressing or repressing emotion and energy.
Yeah. Ooh.
That's just like the way your energetic system works.
Another quote, right? Like your breath is the key in so many ways. And I love that you're speaking to this because I do think a lot of our medical healthcare practitioners listening to this, especially those who've been in the intensive care or in places, there are so many things that are tied to your respiratory system. And your respiratory system is one of the biggest ways that you get rid of waste and toxins in your body. And people don't know that. So like if you're not breathing, that stuff's getting stuck.
Yeah, your system can't work efficiently, period. Right? Yeah. And it's both your physical system and your energetic system.
Yes.
Right? So your breath is your link it's your physical link to your etheric body. So you can just think about it, right? Like you take in air, which you cannot see, but you know exists, right? And your body turns that into energy.
Yeah.
And enables you to do, you have cellular health, cellular respiration happens, right? Because of that process. So that's really your link from the etheric world into the physical world. Mm-hmm. So from an energetic perspective, that's a really strong connection, as well as from a physical perspective. Mm. With my clients, I really use it because it's it helps them process emotion, and helps them get to the source of where their emotion is. But it also is this really key indicator as to where your mental state is and where your emotional state is. Mm. And so, like, a classic thing that I like to say is, if you're going to walk into a meeting that you don't want to have or is going to be hard, 9 times out of 10, you hold your breath before you walk into that meeting. Mm-hmm. Right? And so if you find yourself holding your breath before you do something or walk into a meeting, that's a note to self to be like, okay, what aren't you processing? How aren't you present? Just take a few moments, right? Mm-hmm. Ground down, connect in, and like have that connection and flow going, right? Mm-hmm. And so, for leaders, that's super important. Because look at all the difficult situations, all the difficult conversations, all the unknowns, right? And if you're holding your breath through that, you're eventually going to lead to burnout. Like, that's just the reality, because there's just too much energy that you're suppressing or repressing.
Yeah.
Or holding, right? So that's going to lead. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was about to say feeling inspired, which that we use the word inspiration and expiration, right? For breathing. And inspire means to take in breath, but that SPIR is also the foundation of the word spirit.
Yep.
And so it's this idea that we are breathing in like infinite intelligence source, like it's all around us and it's constantly available to us. And it makes so much sense that when we experience something painful and we stop breathing, we actually cut off our connection.
Yeah. Because you don't want to experience it.
Right.
You don't want to experience unpleasant things, pain, discomfort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're cutting ourselves off from the very thing that is like, let me help you. Like, let me help you move through this, whether you believe in God or not, or however you believe in that. Your breath is the source of renewal. And so it's, and we talk about this, trauma is steeped in disconnection. Yes. That an event was traumatic if it disconnects you from yourself, someone else, or the world.
Yes.
That's it. So the beauty of the work you're doing is that you are helping people reconnect through this source that every single person has.
Correct.
And that you already know how to do.
Correct. Yeah.
You don't even have to think about it. We don't have to think about breathing unless we've conditioned ourselves to stop breathing in specific scenarios. And so that's why, consciously choosing to practice modulating, shifting how you're breathing, that reconditions your body to go, no, don't hold your breath here.
Right. It really also teaches you that you can move through those painful things, mm-hmm. right? The reason why we disconnect is because the pain, in whatever form that looks like, the fear is so great. We don't believe we're going to get to the other side.
Yeah.
Right. And so we stop as a way of preservation. And so the breath, if you can teach yourself to use the breath and keep breathing, you will get to the other side, which is peace and ease and connection, mm-hmm. But if you stop, you don't get to the other side, and you just replay that whatever pain cycle, trauma cycle that is.
Yeah.
Until you can really breathe and process and get to that resolution and integration.
It also makes me think about so many of the dysregulated behaviors that we use, that our body uses. And what's interesting is that when we allow our body to actually use it and we process the event, it goes way better because, I'm thinking about fight, flight, fawning. All of those require extra oxygen. And so what your body says is, hey, you went into this response that requires extra oxygen. I need you to breathe more. And
That's
so you
right.
inherently just start breathing more. And so this, when our kids get really mad or adults get really mad and we're like, dude, calm down. No, like keep breathing. Like keep breathing the way you are breathing because your body is working it out.
Right. Right. I mean, if you watch a kid who has a temper tantrum, and you can really, this is not true all the time, but many, many times, if you allow them just to emote, right? Like oftentimes they'll emote, they'll get it out, and they'll move on.
Right.
Oh,
yes. This happened with one of our kiddos yesterday. They couldn't find their phone and they were hot and they were breathing really heavy and being all sorts. And I got really dysregulated myself because I was trying to do something that was actually like urgent. And they're trying to get me to stop the urgent thing by flailing and breathing loudly to do the not urgent thing of finding their phone. And at one point I started taking some really deep breaths and they were like, what, you just going to get upset with me? I was like, how come you're allowed to be dysregulated and I'm not? I'm like, I'm not telling you to stop. So don't tell me to stop. Like we are both allowed to have our individual experience right here and not make ourselves wrong for it because we're not directing it at each other. And it was so interesting once we were done, they found their phone. Of course, it was like right where they left it, And at the end, I gave them a look and they gave me a look and then they cracked up laughing and I cracked up laughing and I was like, are we good? And they were like, yeah, we're good. And we moved on. Now, is this a child that we're working on patience with? Yeah. So is our ability to not interfere with their process as they learn how to be patient important? Yeah. Like, I don't need to tell them to calm down. I did at first. I started to tell them and I was like, you know what? No, you don't need to calm down. You can be mad. And I still got to finish this thing.
that's right. They can both happen.
Right. Like we can both have our experience. And I don't know about you, but in leadership, that's like one of the biggest things we talk about is rupture and repair and people's unwillingness to have feeling and like get even minorly dysregulated in a business setting because they don't know what to do. That's actually one of the scariest things we have people say. Well, what if somebody gets upset? What if I get upset? What if these things happen? I'm like, okay, you have a process for that now.
Right.
And they can intuitively guide themselves, right?
But that takes a level of emotional responsibility.
It does.
And so most of us didn't grow up with understanding how to be responsible with our emotions. Yeah. So most people who get upset throw that upsettedness up at everybody else around them.
Yeah.
Right. And that's really where the harm happens.
Right.
So in your description is just amazing, right? Like if you had the tools to be like, hey, I'm really upset about this. Let me take a few minutes, work with it, and then come back. That's different, right?
Well, and that's really what you're helping your clients do is to increase that. We call it the window of tolerance. Like I can have uncomfortable things happen and still be able to use the practices that I know work to bring myself back to a state of regulation. And it had never occurred to me that people wouldn't understand this until she said it. And I was like, oh my gosh, of course. She was saying the opposite of dysregulation isn't feeling nothing. Regulation isn't feeling nothing. It's you're still feeling the same feelings oftentimes. You're just A, not making yourself wrong for them. And B, you're approaching them from a state of curiosity and vulnerability.
And you're able to process them.
Right. You're actually able to think about them.
Yes.
Yeah. So she's like, so many people think that being regulated means you're not going to have these like emotional swings. And that is absolutely not the case. It's just that instead of fighting the wave and going under and choking and sputtering, you're going to ride the waves and know how to like stay on your surfboard, you know?
And to me, breath work is the most powerful tool to be able to do that.
Mm. If people want to learn more about breath work, do you have a place that you send them?
Obviously, they can come and work with me.
Yeah. Like, what do you, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I work with people all the time on breath work. It's definitely one of the tools that I share with everybody.
Okay.
The book that I often recommend is called The Presence Process by Michael Brown.
Of course. Presence. I love it.
But that's, he lays out like a self program over 10 weeks. And so, for people who are just getting started and just understanding, it's a nice tool that you don't necessarily need somebody else for.
Thank you for that recommendation. We have a lot of readers, and audiobook listeners, so that's perfect. Well, our time went so fast. I was just looking at the clock going, holy cow. If people want to learn more about working with you or about what you offer, where shall we send them?
My website, danashamas.com.
Perfect.
So that's the easiest place to find me. There are lots of other platforms I'm on, but you'll have all my information right there and all different ways to work with me. Where
is your favorite place to connect with people on social media, or like where do you love sharing?
Probably LinkedIn.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I always like to ask that because, I'm a Facebook or TikTok gal. And so everyone's a little different. Okay. So that's the place you love. So good place for people to connect with you.
For sure.
Awesome. Yes. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking about breath work and intuition and joy. I have deeply enjoyed this.
I have too.
Yes. And to all of our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Please go check out Dana's work and the recommendations in the show notes, and we will see you next week. Bye, y'all. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Invitation to head to our show notes to check out the offers and connections we mentioned. Or you can just head straight over to institutefortrauma.com and hop in our email list so that you never miss any of the cool things that we're doing over at the Institute. Invitation to be well and to take care of yourself this week, and we'll see you next time.